correct, that they're going to prepare for the election. This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Eben Jansen. The show is live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Today we look at recent water shortages in Gauteng and then the underlying reasons for it. Soweto is almost a free Wi-Fi zone thanks to a new initiative that's afoot. Terrabian is our author of the week a little bit later, and we conclude by taking a look at the launch of the 440 and 4 cycle tour here in South Africa. But first, let's get the day's news from Katrin Milan.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrin Milan, and let's take a look at those top stories this morning. The first case of Ebola in the United States has been confirmed in a patient who recently traveled from Liberia to Dallas, Texas. More than 3,000 people have died in West Africa from the worst Ebola outbreak on record. 4 American aid workers who became infected while volunteering in West Africa were flown back to the U.S. for treatment earlier this year. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention has warned that the number of infections could rise to over 1 million people by early next year without a global intervention to contain the virus. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has worked to speed up the use of some experimental vaccines, and pharmaceutical companies are said to be ramping up testing. Earlier this month, New Link Genetics said it would start safety testing of the vaccine within a few weeks, while Inovio Pharmaceuticals said it would start human trials of a DNA-based vaccine in early 2015. Shares of companies that are studying potential vaccines for the Ebola virus climbed after federal officials announced that the first case of the disease had been diagnosed in the U.S. Back home in Gauteng's provincial leaders are on high alert and ready to respond to water-related problems that may resurface in the near future. That's the word from Cooperative Governance MEC Jacob Mamabolo. According to Mamabolo, a special task team has been set up to monitor the situation and initiate emergency response action that may be required in the future. Areas still in need of close monitoring include Diepsloot, Midrand, Sakane and Etwatwa. And Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu has called on all who believe in democracy to support the people of Hong Kong in their pro-democracy protests. In a statement, Tutu says he salutes the courage of the hundreds of thousands of Hong Kong citizens who are participating in mass demonstrations in the streets of Hong Kong. Protesters are demanding reforms ahead of the 2017 elections. The protests are the worst in Hong Kong since China resumed its rule of the former British colony in 1997. They also represent one of the biggest political changes for Beijing since it violently crushed pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square in 1989. All those top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thank you, Katrin. Water has always been considered a fundamental human right, so much so that 60 years ago it wasn't even drafted in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights because water, much like air, was considered so vital that naming it a right, well, would have been redundant. And in today's modern world of technology, we've learned that water is even more important than electricity. For a little over 2 weeks, taps were running dry in various parts of Gauteng. And still, there are conflicting reports on whether it has indeed been fully resolved. Why these water shortages now is one of the questions. Are we looking at a deeper, more serious underlying issue to come? Well, here to help us answer these questions and more is Professor Mary Galvin, an expert on the politics of water from the University of Johannesburg's Department of Anthropology and Development Studies, and then Rand Water Board's Chief Executive, Mr. Percy Sechamani, who has just taken a final water call there. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Sechamani. If I can start with you, I think the question that all the viewers want to know this morning right off the bat is the crisis averted for now? What is the latest?
The latest is on the side of rainwater itself. The crisis has been averted from a point of view of us being able to distribute water to our reservoirs. But of course, we are working with the municipalities in terms of actually ensuring that through the whole value chain, they are also able now to ensure that they can distribute water to their customers.
If you could give people a little insight view into what's happened the last month. What has led to the shortages and the crisis that we've seen?
What has led to the crisis has actually been on the electricity side. People need to understand where rainwater comes from. We are 111 years old this year, and the formation of rainwater has always been around mining, which has meant that unlike other cities, our water source and the city are actually far apart. I mean, we are talking over 60 kilometers from where the water is. And traditionally, you'd find that cities are formed around water sources. Now, the reason why I'm starting here is we actually have to deal with a lot of pumping of water, which means we need a lot of electricity to do that. And in the past, I mean, people talk as if technically you won't find yourself in a situation where sometimes you would have disruptions, power disruptions. We've had them and we've been able to deal with them before. But in this particular case, there were multiple power disruptions, and this is primarily what has led to the situation as we have them, because there's never been any water shortage, but it's always been about how do we distribute water to our reservoirs. So that has primarily been the issue.
I'll get back to that one. I want to talk to Professor Galvin about your views on what we've seen over the last month or so here in Johannesburg. Just your opinion.
Thanks. I think that what we've seen over the last month or so is indicative of a broader crisis in the country that's been growing for a long time. Now that we see it in Johannesburg, people are starting to sit up and pay attention. But we have a crisis of our municipalities, many of whom are not able to deliver, a crisis of infrastructure, where the money that needs to go into infrastructure, the 670 billion that the minister has indicated over the next 10 years, we only have about half of that sum, and also the attitude of the government toward people and needing to prioritize people and the environment in the broader equation. This is all a crisis, and recognizing it's the first step. So at least we've taken the first step.
It is often said that in the future, wars will be fought over resources and governments will be tumbled because of a lack of resources, because that's where we're heading on a planet that seems to be understanding it needs to grow, but there's no place for us to grow. What kind of a threat is a lack of water and, as Mr. Sechimani says, electricity to the government of the day and the will of the people?
Well, we've seen mounting social service delivery protests throughout the country, as we know over the last years. We have the dubious distinction of having one of the highest per capita protests rates in the country. The right to water is recognized by the UN. Our Constitution recognizes access to water as a right. The Water Act recognizes people and the environment. But we still have situations. We have situations like, in Bloemhof with children dying, the Eastern Cape, people drinking water out of irrigation canals in Bushbuck Ridge, and then people protesting, killed by our own government. That's happened near Brits, and the courts coming in and saying deliver water, and it's still not happening in places like Carolina. So I think that, yes, the government will face more and more pressure. The question is whether they'll have the political will to take the really hard decisions and deal with the trade-offs that need to be made.
Mr. Sechimani, a mouthful has been said just now. You seem to be in the hot seat today a little bit. I wanted to ask you, the professor mentioned infrastructure development and failing and ailing infrastructure. You are saying this is not the case with water at all. It's an electricity problem. Is that 100% accurate?
No, I need to separate the answer properly.
Okay.
I was talking specifically to what happened in the past 2 weeks in terms of what was the real cause of why Gauteng or parts of Gauteng ended up not having water. And I was saying it's because we had to pump water. And at this stage, I said there were multiple events that happened. And it was from Eskom, it was from City Power, it was from Ekurhuleni, from a point of view of where we have to tap in to be able to then pump the water to the appropriate reservoirs. But I'm not in any way suggesting that what she's saying is not true if we look at a national picture from a point of view of what we need to do. But I'm also sitting here saying government is actually doing it utmost at this particular point in time, because as an example, our minister has now decided that there are trends and decisions that have been made. As an example, sitting here as Rainwater, we've actually been looking at Gauteng and there are other areas. We actually are present in about 4 provinces. But part of some of the areas that are mentioned by Professor, we are now starting to get into that space as Rainwater as well, because what government has decided to do is to use all its institutions to actually try and streamline the whole issues relating to infrastructure that relates to water. So to that extent as well, even at municipal level, there's a lot of activities that have been done from premier levels and also MECs, as has been in the media at this particular point in time, for us to work together as the full value chain of water to actually change the situation around. We are not there yet. There are still problems, but I like some of the decisions that government has made, to the extent that they are even talking about ensuring that the money for infrastructure on water needs to be isolated, because there's always been in the past some cross-subsidization. But I think in terms of the plans that are in place now, we will start seeing changes in terms of making sure that people have access to water.
That leads us to the next question. And I think it's a question that all South Africans who've been affected by this, but also by electricity and other scenarios. And I want to start with you, Professor. The question that people are asking on social media is that in South Africa, have we become, or are we in danger of becoming, a society where we don't maintain our infrastructure, where we haven't maintained our infrastructure for the last X amount of years, and we only respond to things now when it goes wrong in a certain area?
Exactly. That's exactly the case. The infrastructure is a problem, and the money needs to be found. The question is, if the minister says that 670 billion needs to be found over the next 10 years or so, and we have about half of that money, the question is, where does the rest of the money come from? Right now, the attitude is that we'll push the poor more. Do we need to push the poor more, or do we need to start looking at the trade-offs with agriculture that's using 80% of the water, with industry, with mining? Where do people and the environment come into the plan, and who's going to make the decisions that we can't please everyone? We need to make sure that people do have adequate water.
Your answer to that tough question, Mr. Setchemane.
Look, availability of finite resources will always be a problem, especially of a financial nature. So I do agree with the professor on that. But we also need to be aware that the 670 billion that is being talked about, it's not going to be money that has to be available immediately. This will have to be a multi-year plan in terms of what needs to be done. But from my side, I can actually say on behalf of government that there is a plan, and they are looking at actually making sure that we get the infrastructure to what it's supposed to be. And from our side, just as an example, now talking as the Chief Executive of Rainwater, we are currently spending on infrastructure around 1.5 billion rands on our infrastructure annually, and we're looking at ramping that up to over 2 billion rands. But I need to get back to the issue as you were stating earlier.
Yeah.
Infrastructure that sits out there like ours, we have over 3,000 kilometers of pipe network that is out there in the field. Mm-hmm. The same can be said about Eskom or even City Power, just as an example. Yeah. And I think even Transnet would have that kind of problem as well. Part of what we need to look at is the condition of infrastructure, whether it's been looked after, but as well, even in this case, in terms of some of the incidents that took place, part of that was related to people really vandalizing and stealing some of the infrastructure there. So we're looking at multiple issues. It's not only just saying, let's have money, let's look at this thing and it will go away.
You talk about vandalism. It seems as if it's an increasing problem in our society, not just with water infrastructure elsewhere, stealing of cable theft and all sorts of things. How do you read this situation, and how do we then address this?
Look, at this stage, I would say, for me, that's one of the biggest issues. Given the fact that there's limited available resources to actually say this is the infrastructure that you're looking at. And people need to understand that this is public infrastructure. it's serving the very people that
it belongs to all of us.
It belongs to all of us. So part of what we need to do is looking at awareness. But I think as well, having discussed this with our minister as well, there is an interministerial committee that is being set up to look at the security of infrastructure, especially for public institutions where you have your infrastructure out there. But we're also now making an appeal to ordinary citizens as well to say, this is your infrastructure, make sure you look after it, or at least if people are vandalizing it, let's make sure we find out who the culprits are and they need to be dealt with. Because people don't have an understanding of the impact, the economic and social impact of some of the activities that relates to vandalism and stealing of some of this infrastructure.
Professor, on that note, are we then a country, if we look at crime and we look at the way people respond to police, the way we steal cables, the way we vandalize infrastructure and the like, are we a country at a crisis point with regards to the necessary good citizenry to be a mature democracy?
I think that the problem often starts with our starting point. The vandalism isn't all poor people are vandals. There seems to be a worrying development of attitudes toward the citizens where if the municipalities want to deal with citizens around water, that's limited to a consumer hotline and an invitation to take part in the formation of a development plan. But that actual ongoing communication of a sort of social compact, a relationship between citizens and the government, it's lacking. Citizens are being treated largely with a disregard at this stage.
You've got the final remarks here. What's your message to the citizens out there who really needs to buy into whatever it is, whatever the plan is that you guys come up with, whatever money you spend, they have to buy into these plans. What's your message to them?
Look, one looks at it in two ways. The first one is I agree with Professor on one side that this is not about saying people need to steal for certain reasons. On the other side, there's also organized crime, because there's an industry that is actually cropped up based on this. Yeah. You need to have copper wires or aluminum wires on the side of electricity. Yeah. And then you have a booming market where there is a market where people can actually sell scrap metal. Yeah. I'm not saying you don't have, for the recycling it's important, but I think there has to be tighter rules governing that, because there is a market created. That's why people can be able to vandalize some of the infrastructure, public infrastructure at that. Yeah. And now we find ourselves in situations similar to this. So what we're saying is to appeal to people, because on the other side, there's been a lot of questions relating to whether there were backup plans for what has happened. From my side, I say we had to look at this thing, because part of our own plans has been, let's look at the unlikely event from a point of view of risk management. For me to say I'm taking the whole rainwater and I'm making sure that in the unlikely event that something like the one that has happened happens, I need almost 8 billion rands in terms of just getting standby infrastructure. And then if I'm not relying on electricity, that means I'll rely on gas. And it will be multiple millions per day just to keep those things running. Well, now, on my side, I think it's quite important for people to understand you can get every solution if there's enough resources, but as well, ultimately we'll pass that through the tariff and water will be expensive, and you can't really
resources are not infinite on this planet. We're running out of resources on this planet, and that's the thing that people need to understand. Our populations are booming all around the world, and it seems as resources are becoming less and less. But thank you for joining us and for sending out that message to everybody. It's all of our responsibility to get involved. That's Rand Water Board's Chief Executive, Mr. Percy Sechamani, and then Professor Mary Galvin from the University of Johannesburg. Thank you to the both of you for giving us your views on this thorny water issue we're facing in South Africa. Let's take a look at what you're thinking about it. What you're saying on this issue. What are your views? Paul says, Rand Water, bonuses keep flowing as pipes run dry. Mr. Sechamani, that's very harsh, don't you think? Angela Coppola says, Dear Rand Water, have the tenders for alternative electricity resources gone out yet? And then Tidimalo says, perhaps if MPs stop defending Kadibono and actually start working, we'd be on their side, but to blame sabotage. Hashtag water shortage, it says there. Ashifa Shaba says, I hear it is raining in Gauteng. It is because Rand Water deprived your water, so God decided to provide directly. Everybody's laughing at that one. Noko Maloto says, it's refreshing to see the rich queue to get water. This ordeal is a regular phenomenon in rural areas. That is a rather interesting observation. That is, the rich are queuing right next to the poor. It shows you water is life. We all need it. If you see anybody breaking infrastructure, stealing cable, stealing pipes, please go to the police. Let's take a look now at what's happening in the rest of the world. South China Post. Most of the world papers focusing on pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong as thousands of protesters again flocked to the streets for a fifth night in a row, braving wet weather this time. Here you also have a picture on the international New York Times. It has been called by numerous media outlets the umbrella protest, as protesters refused to back down. Then the pink Miami Herald this morning in support of breast cancer, also reporting on the first case of Ebola that's been diagnosed in Dallas, Texas. Before we take a break, we found this incredible drone footage this morning on YouTube showing thousands of students and activists braving wet weather on the fifth evening of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. The crowds, made up largely of students, sang songs and chanted anti-government slogans, building to a climax to China's National Day. The protests are the worst in Hong Kong since China resumed its rule of the former British colony in 1997. They also represent one of the biggest political challenges for Beijing since it violently crushed pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square in 1989.
SABC News delivers stories that
unify the nation
in many ways. Stories that inspire us
to see the world differently, appreciate
and celebrate our diversity.
And mostly,
they make this place a better country to live in
despite our color,
beliefs
or culture.
I
am
Mahendra Raghunath,
Eben Jansen,
Tabile Ngwato,
Lulu Gabu.
Join us every day
as we provide updates on
local and international news
straight into your home.
We
are
SABC News. SABC News, we've got Africa covered.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom on SABC News. Brightwave, a new age metro telecoms and broadband player, is set to launch a first-of-its-kind high-speed broadband fibre Wi-Fi network, as well as services that will deliver high-quality but affordable broadband in Soweto. The organisation aims to bridge the broadband gap in Soweto, the oldest township here in South Africa, creating access to environments such as schools, shopping malls, community centres, residential and recreational areas, as well as small business. Now, joining us today is the CEO of Brightwave, Mr. Fred Muturi. Good morning, Mr. Muturi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Just give us a little bit of background on the decision that you've made to launch this massive project, really.
Well, it's very interesting that your previous guests were talking about water, and you did mention that a while back water was thought to be a human right. We are of the view now, and it's actually a view broadly shared and being pushed by metro cities, that today broadband access should be a utility, just like electricity and water. In today's digital world, everything is happening online. The challenge we have is that our masses who form the majority of the population are excluded. We talk about digital exclusion, and now we're talking about digital inclusion. We believe that using a combination of fiber, a couple of years back, there was not too much capacity coming into Africa, international capacity. Today we have multiple cables delivering a lot of capacity into the continent. There was not too much fiber inland. Today we have a lot of backhaul infrastructure. We are developing a lot of metro fiber networks, most of which are actually empty. We are talking about partnering, utilizing what is available, but delivering to the masses. The ideal platforms naturally are fiber to the homes. In our world of today, in a poor environment, fiber to the home is too expensive. So what we're saying is fiber to the nearest point, distribute capacity over Wi-Fi. So that's what we're doing. And Soweto is an obvious starting point because it constitutes half of the population of Johannesburg.
Yeah.
It's got less than 5% penetration of broadband to the homes. If broadband is to be a utility, then we need to impact the majority. Hence our starting point to deliver Wi-Fi, fiber Wi-Fi to the last mile in the market of Soweto.
How do you then connect computer literacy, tech literacy for that matter, with broadband penetration in these areas?
Well, the first users will inevitably be the youth.
Yeah.
In today's broadband,
the early adopters.
The early adopters, exactly. So the youth are literate in terms of computers. In fact, in majority cases, if you get your child who's in grade 4, they can most likely teach you what you could do online.
Yeah.
So in that regard, is not a challenge. So we start with the early adopters. The key issue really becomes an issue of access to devices. So the smart devices, whether it's smartphones or tablets and so forth.
Yeah.
That's an area we are working to address. The need for it is very much open. A lot of social media, a lot of interaction online. When we talk about distributing images, and you talked about this program being streamed on YouTube.
Yeah.
So the need to be online exists today.
Yeah.
The challenge we have is access to high speed but affordable access and connectivity, which is actually the big gap.
In South Africa, what is affordable? Because we seem to be, in South Africa, we seem to be stuck in a scenario where monopolies make these processes almost unaffordable or only affordable for the elites in our country. How do we deal with the monopolies that make doing business for small business so expensive, for kids so expensive? How do we come to terms with that?
Well, we are not looking at dealing with the monopolies. I think we are looking at the fact that exists. It creates the opportunity for more new age, more creative startups like ourselves to identify where is the gap. And we believe that the monopolies exploit the fact that they have invested in substantial infrastructure.
Yeah.
And they use that as a limitation to access into that sector. Now, with the emergence of smart city initiatives, we have the city of Johannesburg, for instance, that has invested through partnerships in a metro network that is accessible to all areas of Johannesburg, including the underserved markets.
Yeah.
Now, tapping into that kind of an investment, we are then able to leapfrog without having to make the huge investment upfront, but using that investment to deliver low-cost but affordable service to the masses.
Finally, extending this throughout the rest of the country, are you thinking that way? Have you done some of it, and how do you see that working?
Well, I think our view is, first of all, Soweto gives us a good platform to deploy a number of approaches. Once successful, then we can see how to extend that to other areas. For instance, before we go to Soweto, there were only 3 known Wi-Fi hotspots. When we talk about maybe somewhere in Jabulani Mall, somewhere in Maponya, and somewhere in Vilagazi Street.
Yeah.
In 6 months, we've deployed more than 150 hotspots in Soweto. The intention is to ensure that there is sufficient coverage in such a way that we can assess the adoption, we can determine what are the right products, what is the right price points. When we got that right, then there's a whole host of areas within Johannesburg. We're looking at Gauteng in the medium term, and I know this kind of initiative is also taking place in other sort of cities in South Africa.
Exciting development in times ahead. And thank you for coming in today and sharing with us your view of this CEO of Brightwave, Mr. Fred Maturi. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you.
Yes, it is a basic human rights. Free Wi-Fi, I'm telling you, from Mr. Maturi. That's what the future holds. Much like water, your Wi-Fi access should be free. What do you think about that? Let's take a look at some of the other views on social media. Kwame says, first case of Ebola reported in Dallas, USA. They're going to make a movie or boiled water bucket challenge. I love that. Ben Nuome says, Ebola did not trend when 1,000 died in West Africa, nor 2,000, nor even 2,883. Then one case happened in Dallas, and it's like Armageddon. It's unfortunate, but that's how the world works at the moment. George Murache said, wait, so Ebola got to the US before Kenya. Dials on Skype, hey, friend in Texas, are you okay? We heard you guys have been affected. Amazing. And then Dominic Dyer says, Ebola has broke out of Africa. US Center Disease Control about to make a statement concerning a person with Ebola infection in Texas. Expect global panic. Yes, I'm sure now all the drugs will become available for Ebola. And today we saw the share price of those drug companies that are working on Ebola vaccines. Their share price has gone up by 5%. That is ridiculous and almost criminal. But let's take a look at what's on our Facebook page. A man who flew from Liberia to Texas has become the first patient infected with the deadly Ebola virus to be diagnosed in the United States. Health officials said so yesterday. A sign the outbreak ravaging West Africa could spread globally. All of that there. Also, you see there that the city of Johannesburg has declared war against the rats that have been wreaking havoc in townships and informal settlements. With owls, I tell you. And also the Lesotho government secretary, Mahloli Mpaka, says police and the army exchanged gunfire outside his home in Kubetswana, just outside the capital, Maseru there. All of that and other stories, lots of detail and pictures of the Newsroom team there on our Facebook page. Now to take a little look back in time. Today, in 1908, we saw the launch of Henry Ford's Model T car that would forever change the automobile industry and led to what we know today. Henry Ford was determined to produce a simple, reliable and affordable car, a car the average American worker could afford. Out of this determination came the Model T and also the assembly line, two innovations that revolutionized American society and molded the world we live in today. The Model T made its debut in 1908 with a purchase price of $825.
Africa is growing at a rapid rate.
A huge part of this African growth is technological innovation.
Like a group of students hard at work in Uganda developing tools that will save lives. Or an African-developed payment method making the public transport industry cashless in Kenya.
You book me through M-Pesa.
There are apps only for people who live here. And the continent is accepting the growth of modern technology usage in people's everyday lives.
The ICT revolution now belongs to Africa.
This is information that matters to us.
To find out a bit more about social media and technology news, join Ms. Phumelele Zondi every Sunday at 7:30 p.m.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Hello and welcome back here with Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at those top stories this morning. The World Health Organization has worked to speed up the use of some experimental vaccines, and pharmaceutical companies are said to be ramping up testing as well. Earlier this month, New Link Genetics said it would start safety testing on all vaccines within a few weeks, while Inovio Pharmaceuticals said it would start human trials on DNA-based vaccines in early 2015. Shares of companies that are studying potential vaccines for the Ebola virus climbed after federal officials announced that the first case of the disease had been diagnosed in the US. Back home, and Gauteng's provincial leaders are on high alert and ready to respond to water-related problems that may resurface in the near future. That's the word from Cooperative Governance MEC Jacob Mamabolo. According to Mamabolo, a special task team has been set up to monitor the situation and initiate emergency response action that may be required in the future. Areas still in need of close monitoring include Diepsloot, Midrand, Takane and Etwatwa. And Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu has called on all who believe in democracy to support the people of Hong Kong in their pro-democracy protests. In a statement, Tutu says he salutes the courage of the hundreds of thousands of Hong Kong citizens who are participating in mass demonstrations in the streets of Hong Kong. Protesters are demanding reforms ahead of the 2017 elections. The protests are the worst in Hong Kong since China resumed its rule of the former British colony in 1997. All those top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katrine. Now, our author this week is Terry Bean, who earlier this year penned the book Connect with the Continent, Understanding Trends Across the African Continent, that is. Good morning to you, Terry. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good morning.
Interesting book, one of my favorite topics. I feel sometimes as an African, myself, I'm a bit disconnected with the continent, as the rest of South Africa often is. You've traveled the continent extensively. Are we that disconnected from Africa as one sometimes feels?
I think a little bit. It is a bit of a challenge and a bit of a concern. I think Africa lies on the doorstep of South Africa, but we call it South Africa, and it seems to have some kind of distance between ourselves and the rest of the continent. I think that's changing a little bit, but there are an enormous amount of things happening, some amazing trends and social movements happening across the continent that people in this part of the world are fairly unaware of.
The book, Connect with the Continent, is that the premise? Is it a scenario that plays out where you look at innovation, growth, all the beautiful new things that the New World has to offer that's happening on the continent that we don't often see?
Absolutely. I mean, the purpose of the book is to really unpack those and make them accessible to people, whether you're a chief executive or whether you're a young entrepreneur who really wants to understand more about how the continent ticks, what some of the kind of key movements are and the trends, and we try and kind of make that accessible for everybody.
Now, we're always told that, Africa is the place of premium brands, where premium brands rule the roost. Is that still the case, or is it changing?
There is definitely a love of luxury within the upper echelons of society. I mean, obviously that's not accessible to everybody, but people love their brands. It was really interesting in the same month that Woolworths pulled out of South Africa, or pulled out of Nigeria. Nigeria was announced to be the largest economy of the continent. And if you speak to kind of young kids up there, they would say some really interesting stuff. They say, I'd rather save up for a second-hand pair of Levi jeans and buy them off the side of the road than buy a brand I don't understand, I don't know.
That's amazing. Now, the outlook. I want to talk to you about the outlook. There's always been a lot of pessimism about Africa in the last century. This is now the Renaissance we're talking about. We're talking about Thabo Mbeki's dream. We're talking about, the African century, as they call it now. 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies on the planet are in Africa. Is the outlook that good right now? And I'm talking in the streets. Do you feel that positivity when you travel around the continent?
Well, really interesting when you travel around the continent and you speak to people. They believe tomorrow is going to be better than today. They are absolutely optimistic about the future, and sometimes in quite harsh circumstances. But they genuinely believe that they, as individuals, within their cities and within their countries, are moving forward very rapidly. And that sense of optimism translates across society. People are willing to try new things. They're willing to experiment in different areas, and you see that coming through in terms of the business community and obviously in the growth of the economies as well.
Let's get back to your book. How does the book sit with someone who's not a business person or business savvy, for that matter?
I think perfectly well. A lot of, when we launched the book a while ago, a number of chief executives came to talk to us around the content afterwards, but also we met up with some young musicians who were saying, you know what, this is really accessible. I now understand where to go and what to do and how to take my product forward. So it's not all around making money. It's just around understanding the trends that are going on, and some of them are really fascinating. One of the real big trends at the moment is the rise of Nollywood and that movie industry. I mean, they produce about 1,000 movies a year. And the numbers are quite phenomenal. Their ability to distribute their product, they bootleg the bootleggers. They understand bootlegging is a real thing in that market, so they'll go to DVD, they'll go online, and they'll go into the movies on the same day.
You talk about bootlegging, the bootleggers. It almost seems that we understand that language in Africa. But what are then the challenges that businesses face on the continent? The little things that you've noticed that in order to be successful you have to deal with?
I think there's a genuine sense of people not really understanding how developed the markets are. They may not look formally developed, but they are high developed. So you find that businesses go in sometimes with a little bit of a Eurocentric view as to how to build a business. And when they're doing that, they don't really pay enough attention to what's going on the ground. And if you look at sort of key markets like Lagos or Nairobi or Lusaka or Luanda, they know how they tick, and they work very efficiently, but they work in a very unique way.
We always worry in Africa whether we are competitive internationally, whether we compete with international trends and brands, and as a continent, where are we right now?
I think competitiveness is broken down in different areas. I mean, in the manufacturing sector, we are starting to pick up in some really interesting countries. Ethiopia is investing really heavily in its manufacturing sector at the moment and starting to manufacture for big brands like Zara and H&M, and it's all coming out of places like Addis. That's quite interesting. There's a growing agricultural sector. In fact, agriculture is probably the big growth area in the future. And you see some of the big businesses internationally and also continentally investing very heavily in industrializing their agricultural production. And it's become quite fascinating that we feel that Africa is going to become an export-driven market in the future as opposed to an import-driven market, and driving things like agricultural product is a big thing. The
breadbasket of the world. That's what I want Africa to be. That's what I'm telling the guys. Invest in the breadbasket of the world, because that's where we want to take Africa. Terry Behan, fantastic book. Thank you. Connect the Continent. If you want to do business on the continent, you have to buy this book. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, something completely different. Thousands of skateboarders from around the world are descending in Kimberley for the annual World Skateboarding Grand Prix. The best skaters from more than 37 countries are expected to compete for the World Champion title. This year's event will also, for the first time, feature a Women's Street World Championship. The coveted prize money for this competition is a whopping 5 million rand. Well, Margaret Matibi, she's standing by to give us a little update about the competition.
An afternoon that many Broadband children will never forget. Some say they had never seen a skateboard, and today they got to rub shoulders with the best in the game. Many children couldn't contain their excitement as professional skateboarders showed them the ropes. Organizers say the skateboarding competition has revived Kimberley.
It's growing every year. For me, it's more than just a great contest, the pinnacle of all skateboarding contests. It's a lot about the social responsibility and what we do. I think right now we're in Rodapan doing a Skateboard for Hope tour, handing out skateboards and touching lives of a lot of youth.
For the first time since the competition started, there will be a category for female skateboarders. Among them is Alyssa Steamer from Florida, who was among the first women in the world to attain professional status.
I am finding that more girls are taking up skateboarding. We actually went around to some of the townships the last couple of days and introduced skateboarding to the children, and the girls seemed a lot more eager than the boys.
The prize money for the competition is over 5 million rand. The competition starts on Thursday and ends on Sunday and will include a hip-hop concert where international rapper Lil Jon is expected to perform. Margaret Mutibi, SABC News, Kimberley.
Yeah, it should be a big show. Now, intense training is underway for the annual 440 in 4 cycle tour, set and ready to take off on a journey of hundreds of kilometres. Katrine is standing by with us.
Oh yes, dedicated cyclists will hit the road for 4 days on a journey through a multitude of different terrains between Johannesburg and Maseru, Lesotho on the 22nd of this month. The sweat and effort, however, will all be for a good cause, as the initiative, driven by Roundtable Rivonia, aims to raise funds for various charities. Now today we are joined from Roundtable Rivonia by Mike Atter as well as Gareth Arnold, who will both be hitting the road as well later this month. Welcome to Newsroom, guys.
Thank you.
Gareth, I would like to start with you. I understand intense training is already underway. Can you tell us a bit more about the background and the idea behind this whole initiative?
Well, it all started about 9 years ago, and the guys were like, well, how can we, raise money? And they decided to do something out of the ordinary. So it was 110 Ks every day, so the length of Argus, at 4 days in a row. And it started with 5 cyclists, and today we have 12 every year. And it's grown from strength to strength.
Now, how many cyclists are we expecting this year?
So, we've got 12 booked, and there's still room for a couple more. But it's getting closer. If the guys aren't prepared, it's going to be tough 4 days on the saddle.
And then, Mike, just the organizations that you guys are aiming on getting involved in this. I understand you guys are also still looking for sponsors for the event.
Absolutely. So, on a national level, Roundtable's involved with the likes of Sunflower Fund. But, on a local level, and, we're very passionate about charities around the Rivonia area, and especially the focus for us on children and foster homes. So there's sort of 3 or 4 foster homes that we support, Mother of Peace in North Riding, Just One Child in Gallo Manor, and a few others. So, our passion is to try and sort of, help those underprivileged children, give them a bit more of a start.
Now, both of you guys will be taking part. Can you guide us through the journey you guys will be taking from the 22nd?
Well, we're going to be starting in Gauteng, just this side of the Vaal River, cycle through Parys to Kroonstad, so we spend the night there. Second day is a long day, 140 kilometers to Bethlehem. And then from Bethlehem we travel to Vicksburg and then through the border, and it's a beautiful last day through Lesotho, and we end in Maseru. So it's all uphill. It's going to be tough.
How does one start preparing for a race like this, a journey like this?
Well, look, I think for weekend warriors, it's a little bit difficult. We don't have, you can't prepare for 4 days. So, but every weekend we cycle together. We do a lot of races. And then it's just fuss bait on the 4 days,
Tell me a bit more about Roundtable and the work you guys do here in Johannesburg.
Absolutely. So, Roundtable started in the 1920s in the UK, came to South Africa in the late 1940s, and really it came out of an initiative for younger adult males to be involved in the community and promote business and charitable events. So, now it's strong across the province. We've got, I think, 15 tables. We've got over 100 members, and there are tables in every province. So we will be hosted by each of the tables in the cities and towns that we go through. I think it's over 1,000 members across the country at the moment.
Now, it is an annual event. How is this year different? I understand the journey is obviously different, and how are you planning on making it different to attract more people this year?
Well, last year we went downhill. We rode down to Durban.
Yeah, and I think the altitude's going to be tougher, and it's going to be the first time we're going to be in a foreign country. So I think, going through a border post on bicycles should be quite interesting. It might be the first time that, Lesotho has seen that. And we're also getting in contact with a couple of NGOs in Maseru, and we're looking at perhaps helping them for the first time.
And now, just to wrap, people who want to get involved, you want to donate or even join the journey that you guys will take on the 22nd, if I'm correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Where can they get more detail?
Well, we have our website, which is rivonia230.org, and you can also find us on Facebook, which is Rivonia Roundtable 230, and there's contact details on both those sites, and you're welcome to make contact with us.
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us this morning and telling us a bit more. It's Mike and Gareth from Roundtable Rivonia 230 telling us more about the 440 in 4 cycle challenge that will be set to be hitting the road on the 22nd of October this month. Eben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Katrin. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park here in Johannesburg every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a total rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning. Don't forget, we also stream live on YouTube every morning with our whole show available all day on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.
The call centre industry is experiencing exceptional growth in South Africa, with unemployment affecting huge sectors of the population. Government has looked to this industry to help make a change. One company in particular has managed to answer this call and in the process grown in leaps and bounds. Today they can boast to be the largest outsourced call centre in Africa.
A number of factors contributed to the phenomenal growth of Direct Channel, the most significant of which I think was that we identified a need for a specific service within a particular industry. Outbound telesales at the time was still in its infancy. Our unique offering was that we were able to target the emerging lower and middle income black market in all official languages. For the first time we were able to offer financial service institutions and insurance companies a service whereby we were able to distribute their products over the telephone. So we were able to now get into people's homes, their places of work while they were traveling without having to be right there with them. And this new distribution channel was really the foundation of the rapid growth. I dropped out of college almost 20 years ago. In fact, exactly 20 years ago, in 1987. And by default, I ended up in the financial services insurance industry up in Johannesburg about 14 years ago. My first job was as a half-day telesales consultant at one of the banks. Grew within the bank over a period of 6 years, occupying a number of junior and middle management positions. I must also say at the time I was holding down 3 jobs, full-time at the bank, one at night and one on weekends. But over the years I moved on into advertising, finally ending up at one of the largest insurance companies as their group direct marketing and relationship marketing manager. It was at that time that I realized the need for such a service in the industry.
Suleiman may have started out all those years ago working for corporate companies, but today his entrepreneurial flair and business acumen has ensured that a number of young black unemployed individuals are able to work and earn an honest living.
Those close to me know that I still value good old-fashioned principles: honesty, integrity, respect. But on the business front, I'm exceptionally driven to be a winner. In fact, that winning principle within the organization has now filtered down to all levels of management and our staff. Direct Channel has won a number of accolades over the past few years in terms of our service delivery to our clients and to the industry as a whole. And it's those winning ways that actually drive us. It's not the accolades that we actually chase. It's cementing our position as a leader in the industry that's most important to us. By being a leader, we are guaranteeing the stability and the success of the business in the long term.
Although he was born in the small town of Escourt in northern KwaZulu-Natal, Suleiman always lived by the principle to think big, resulting him moving to Johannesburg. It was while working for some of South Africa's leading companies and traveling extensively overseas did Suleiman realize that he can only realize his true potential if he sets up his own business. As a result, Direct Channel Holdings was formed and within a remarkably short space of time has been built up into South Africa's leading call centre. With operations now spanning 5 locations in South Africa and 2 African locations launching in 2008, the company employs almost 2,000 staff. Direct Channel's commitment to social upliftment of previously disadvantaged and unemployed people is exceptional, but it is the company's corporate social investment policy that has received much attention over the years.
It actually took me a while to buy into the concept of setting up a contact center that can accommodate blind people. It was a shocking statistic that was presented to us that 97% of blind and partially sighted people go through their adult life without any form of gainful employment. And once we visited the Pioneer School for the Blind down in Worcester, we realized how